Hello, welcome to Complete Chiropractic Healthcare, the website of Dr. Greg Arnold, www.pitchingdoc.com. Today we're going to be discussing my May 6th, 2016 newsletter, what I call Stop Teaching the Safety Curve. And underneath the date, there's a hyperlink for a PDF that'll pull up a document that's usually easier to read. So this is the fifth of my Stop newsletters. Here are the previous four. And if you're on the original website, you click on each of these hyperlinks and it'll pull up each of these newsletters, which I'm trying to get the correct information out there by dispelling old baseball teaching myths. This one is about the harm of throwing on one knee. This is about the harm of focusing too much on the throwing arm and not enough on body position. The third is another mistaken concept about making pitchers stand tall, which is actually making them less athletic and more prone to inaccuracy and decreased velocity. And this is about dispelling the myth about building arm strength to throw the ball hard. And usually it's about long toss, and long toss is not about building arm strength, it's about timing. So those are the four that you can get into after this newsletter. So this newsletter, we address what I have been hearing right now among the young kids is what's being called a safety curve. And it's being taught by coaches to help prevent injury. When I was in California for several years, the coaches out there called it the low torque slider. And the premise and the whole idea about it is to throw it like a football and to not snap the wrist. So while the goal of teaching this is correct, where we want to try to protect young pitchers from getting hurt with the curveball, the premise of it is incorrect. And the premise is that they're teaching these kids that if you don't snap your wrist, your elbow isn't going to hurt. And what we need to dispel today is that myth. And it's not the snap of the wrist that damages the elbow, it's the tilt of the shoulders that occurs when young kids try to throw curveballs. Now, I've done 4 previous newsletters highlighting studies that have been able to show this, and so we're going to go through these newsletters quickly, and every time I show the date, there's a hyperlink here where you can actually go to the actual newsletter. So the first one was back in 2008 that was based on a study where they looked at the delivery and mechanics between pitchers throwing fastballs, curveballs, and changeups and sliders. And they found that if the mechanics between all of the pitches were similar, where they didn't have different shoulder tilts and upper body position and arm slot, things like that, they found that the curveball actually had less stress on the elbow and the shoulder compared to throwing the fastball. And here are the numbers from the study. And the numbers were so compelling that the researchers concluded that this seems to indicate that the curveball is not a more dangerous pitch than the fastball. And we'll get to the whole concept of the mechanics in a second. 2012, I did another study and another newsletter based on this study out of Japan, which looked at upper body tilt and arm stress. And what they found was that 10 degrees of shoulder tilt produced the least amount of arm stress in the elbow and the shoulder. So, well, what does 10 degrees of shoulder tilt look like? This is what it looks like. Just a slight tilt of the shoulders when we're throwing the ball. And it even showed that having the arm angled 10 degrees up from midline. It says 100, but you have to remember that right here is 90 degrees. So 100 degrees is 10 up from the midline. So this is what 10 degrees of shoulder tilt looks like. They found out that when the pitchers got to 40 degrees of shoulder tilt, arm stress doubled compared to 10 degrees. So this was the statement: 40 degrees of contralateral trunk tilt doubled the smallest value. So what they found, that 40 degrees of shoulder tilt provided the most stress, while 10 degrees provided the least amount of stress. So what does 40 degrees of shoulder tilt looks like? This is what it looks like most closely from what the pictures I could find. 2013, another study came out. This was the newsletter title that I used, and this was the study out of the American Journal of Sports Medicine. And what they looked at was they drew a line from the forehead of the pitcher down to the ground, and then they drew a line from the middle of the foot to the top, and they looked at the space right here where the arrows are, and they found that if the upper body tilted more than one head width, from center, they showed that shoulder stress increased by 11% and elbow stress increased by 11.4%. And when does this big head displacement occur? It occurs when kids tilt their shoulders. So you can see the research is starting to correlate, where we get the more the shoulders tilt, the more off-center the body becomes, the greater the arm stress. And this is what the researchers concluded, was pitching with excessive contralateral tilt may increase the pitcher's susceptibility to injury. And this was the fourth newsletter that I did from last year that looked at lateral trunk tilt, and they looked at trunk tilt and ball velocity, and they did show an increase in velocity with increased shoulder tilt, but it was so minor compared to the increased shoulder stress, specifically that velocity increased by 1.1 miles an hour for every 10 degrees of shoulder tilt, and this correlated about 1.5% extra velocity, but it led to shoulder stress increasing by more than double and elbow stress more than tripling compared to the velocity increase. And what they found out, that this increase was not worth the price of the extra velocity. So you weren't getting really any more bang for your buck the more you tilted to get that extra velocity. So the velocity increase was minimal compared to the increase in the arm stress. So the bottom line is that it's not the tilt, it's not the snap of the elbow, it's the tilt of the shoulder. And what we talk about is, if a young pitcher can throw his curveball with the same mechanics as the fastball, there is no increased risk of injury. But that's the big if. Very few young pitchers have consistent throwing motions, just like we see very young hitters have very inconsistent swings. So the approach that I take when I work with my pitching students is, we have to establish a consistent fastball throwing motion, after which we then learn the changeup, which teaches them to change speeds, and then after that we learn the curveball. So I really make the kids earn the right to learn the curveball. So in the end, it's not the snap, it's the tilt. So I hope this newsletter made sense. Again, the research is there to prove that it's not the snap, it's the tilt of the shoulders. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, pitchingdoc@msn.com, the phone number listed, or go to my website at www.pitchingdoc.com. Thank you.